Good evening. My name is John Shaw. I'm the director of the Paul Simon Public Policy Institute and would love to welcome you here tonight for the hottest ticket in town. I know it's, thank you for being so patient with us as we've worked through the ticketing system. I know it's been a challenge for everyone, so thank you so much for being here. Let me first start out by thanking Gil and Jean Kroening for being so generous in funding this lectureship. So Gil and Jean, why don't you stand up? Just a couple of very quick rules. We ask that there be no flash photography, filming, or live streaming, no food, silence all cell phones if you would please. Due to the large crowds, if you could please stay in your seat till the end of the event. And also there will be a book signing after the event, and Dr. Grandin is very gracious about signing books, and so we will have plenty of books for you to purchase, so we look forward to that. I probably don't have to spend too much time introducing our speaker. She's sort of a rock star around much of the country. But Temple Grandin is a professor of animal science at Colorado State University and has been a leader in improving the handling and welfare of farm animals. She was inspired by a high school teacher who she talked about quite touchingly this morning, and had a very formative experience on a ranch in Arizona with her aunt, which provoked her to pursue a career as a scientist and livestock equipment designer. She has a BA at Franklin Pierce College and a master's in animal science at Arizona State and a doctorate in animal science at the University of Illinois. That's the other school in Illinois down the road. She's written a number of books, including one, her memoir, Thinking in Pictures, which the New York Times a few months ago called one of the 50 most important memoirs of the last half century. She's won more awards than we can really probably even chronicle tonight. As I looked at Wikipedia, some of the ones that were striking to me were the American Academy of Arts and Sciences, the National Women's Hall of Fame, the Cowgirl Hall of Fame, and then in 2010, Time magazine named her one of the 100 most influential people in the world. So with that, let me just introduce Dr. Temple Grandin.
Got lots of things to talk about tonight. In fact, that's a book I've done on my childhood projects, Calling All Minds. You know, we got to get kids out building things. We got to get kids out doing stuff with their hands. That's something that we need to get them doing. I think one of the biggest mistakes that schools have made is taking the skilled trades out of the schools. I had a chance to go on a really cool trip to NASA. And that launch pad right there was built by somebody who had Tourette's syndrome. Let me tell you, the special ed department builds the stuff. And I've been learning a lot more about NASA. And I'm going to be talking about the different kinds of minds. There's a reclusive guy named Hal who lives in a messy office at MIT. He did algebra equations that enabled a 70-pound box that was barely a calculator land on the moon. And then the other thing that nobody knows about, and this is more the visual thinking side of things, which is my side of things, is the spacesuit was made by the Playtex Corporation. You know, not that high tech, but very clever. You know, the 4 ladies sewed the spacesuit and made it work. Now, my grandfather was a co-inventor of the automatic pilot for airplanes. And he's an MIT-trained engineer. And he worked with a guy who probably had Asperger's syndrome. And the guy with Asperger's syndrome came up with this really crazy idea for 3 little coils. Everybody thought it was nuts. And my grandfather made it work. See, the visual thinking mind will often come up with very simple ideas. That really annoyed me when I went and visited Sperry that makes this in the 70s. I went to their factory, and they said, well, those are simple little things. Well, the problem is simple little things are not easy to think up. No, don't just call it that. And he had to work in a loft over where they fixed trains. This wasn't very, very well-funded startup. But in World War II, it was in every single airplane. Yeah. An MIT-trained engineer, mathematician, and a crazy visual guy named Andrew Nickian, and they worked in this loft, and they had to tinker to get it to work. We've got kids today who have never hooked up a garden hose. That's ridiculous. We've got kids today that have trouble sewing up cuts when they become doctors because they've never used a needle and thread, and they've never used scissors. No, I'm being serious. No, we got to get back doing hands-on stuff. You know, here's some little kids here using tools. This was at a kindergarten that was not that far from here, working on an Italian model where you get kids doing stuff. And we get so worried about liability, they're not doing anything. In my livestock handling class, the students have to do a scale drawing. And I'll have students say, well, why is learning to do a scale drawing important? Well, maybe you're going to remodel your kitchen. Or you don't want to be like the young people that live in my sister's apartment building, and they buy a couch, and they didn't measure it, and it doesn't fit in the elevator, so they got to hire couch doctors to cut it up and bring it up to their apartment. I'm not kidding. I am not kidding. We've got some students today that don't know how to use a tape measure. I'm absolutely not kidding about this stuff. And they got these little kids making robots, and then they'll ask, well, can we plug it into the charger? Is it going to walk? No, I don't think it's going to walk. Now, that's one of my drawings. Now, when you're weird, the way you sell yourself is showing off your work. This drawing right here was the drawing that I sent to Mr. Fielding of Cargill to convince him that maybe I should design the front end of every Cargill plant in North America. I've also got a piece of equipment called the center track restrainer I designed for big beef plants. And when people saw my work, they were impressed. So these kids that are different, let's get portfolios together that they can show employers. Maybe programming, photography, drafting, welding projects they've made. Now the thing is, you got to touch to perceive. I watched the industry switch from hand drafting to computers, and we started getting weird mistakes on drawings because they came from people who had never built anything and had never used their hands. Things like the center of the circle was no longer in the center of the circle. That is really serious. That's not good. Well, I got to watch the SpaceX launch. That was really cool. And let me tell you, the geeks and the nerds, they build the stuff at Cape Kennedy. I'm saying that seriously. And when I was a teenager, I loved model rockets, but I had to make them. Now, I got bullied and teased in school, and the only place I was not bullied and teased was the specialized interests. Things like horseback riding, model rockets, electronics. You've got to get these kids going with the shared interest things. Otherwise, they're going to end up getting bullied and teased. Another thing you got to do with a lot of these kids that are different is they're like a slow phone with only one bar of service. They got the Amazon cloud for computing, but multitasking is really difficult. So they're starting out in their new job, give them a pilot's checklist. I have no working memory. You're going to teach me a task with 10 steps, I need a pilot's checklist. It's just that simple. If you're working with a little kid, slow down when you talk to them because they got a slow processor. There's SpaceX taking off. And that's a bird kite that I made when I was 7. And notice it has the little wingtips like what the airplanes have. I had to tinker to get it to work. It didn't work right away. See, this is something that kids aren't doing today. Another big concern I've got is writing skills. Writing was a very important part of my career because I would design a project and then I wrote about it. And the way I learned how to be a good writer is the teachers would mark up my work and then I had to go and correct it. The last 5 years, we've been getting graduate students with terrible writing skills. And I'm finding out they never did a book report where they had to learn how to summarize something. So there's the wingtips on the plane right there. There are some other fancier ones. They got bunches of different shapes. They got really cool patents. It's really fun for kids to look up patents. and then somebody went crazy with just totally weird ones. That's completely crazy. And my next slide shows optical illusion room. I got fascinated by optical illusions, and I saw it in a movie, and my science teacher said, you're going to have to figure out how to build that yourself. He wasn't going to just show me how to do it. He wanted me to figure it out for myself, and that's really important. Learning how to do it myself. And there's the titles to the HBO movie. And he let me see one picture in a textbook, just really fast, where I would see that shape. But he wanted me to solve the problem. And the HBO movie shows how I think accurately, and it shows all my projects. Now, schools have got to keep these classes in the schools. One of the worst things we did was taking out art, sewing, cooking, playing musical instruments, woodworking, theater, welding, auto shop, creative writing. Taking that out is the worst things that we've done. Sorry about the coughing, trying to get over some bronchitis. Now, an interesting study showed that a Nobel Prize winner was 50% more likely to have an arts and crafts hobby compared to other scientists. This is another reason for keeping these classes in the schools. Another thing that I'm finding is that a lot of grandparents are coming up to me, and they're finding out that their kid is autistic, when their kid was autistic, that they were autistic. They're discovering that they're on the spectrum when kids get diagnosed. And why does Granddaddy have a decent job? Because he learned how to work when he was 11. Another advantage, my generation, is social skills were taught in a much more structured way. You were taught to say please and thank you. That's not being done today. The other big thing we've got to do is we've got to control the video game playing. Kids that get addicted to video games, they're not going anywhere. I'm not going to be that nice about it. They're not becoming video game designers. We got to get that under control. And learning how to work is really important. Starting at about age 11, how about dog walking for the neighbors, church volunteer jobs? You can work in a retail store at 15 here. That's when you need to start working. Another problem we've got with autism is that it's so variable. You're going from Einstein, who had no speech until age 3, Steve Jobs, to somebody who can't dress themselves. It's all got the same name. People are getting way too hung up on the labels. I know people that stutter, ADHD, dyslexia, all kinds of labels, and they own metal fabrication companies, making stuff for the meat industry. Now, a brain can be more cognitive, or a brain can be more social-emotional. Autism in its milder forms is just part of personality variation. You can be more social, or you can be more thinking. Because in autism, you've got like extra circuits back here, shortchange the social circuits. Now, here's a mind blower of a paper. Genomic trade-offs are autism and schizophrenia, the steep price for a human brain. The same genes that make our brain big also cause autism and schizophrenia. You're not going to get rid of it. It's totally embedded. Now, here's another mind blower about animals. There's a paper called Solitary Mammals as a model for autism. Lions are more social than leopards. Does that make leopards defective? No, but there's crossover here with autism. Now, the thing I want to ask you is what would happen to some famous innovators today if they were in today's educational system? This is something I'm really concerned about. Would they be less successful? Steve Jobs, bullied in school? He's probably on the spectrum. But you know what? Silicon Valley avoids the labels. Yeah, when I go out there, they inspect my slides and make sure I didn't put the big A word on it. But half the people out in Silicon Valley are on the spectrum. So one geek's running a Fortune 500 company, and another's in the basement playing video games. They are the same geek. Einstein had no speech till age 3. Steven Spielberg was very dyslexic. And one of the things that saved him was he had early exposure to photography because he had a little Super 8 movie camera. And I'm seeing too many kids getting labeled different labels, and I'm worried that our educational system is screening these kids out. Us visual thinkers like me, we can't do algebra. It doesn't make any sense to me. You see, if I don't have a picture in my mind, I don't have a thought. It's just that simple. But I'm going to show you how you need us visual thinkers, and you need us really badly. And, here's an interesting article about dyslexic CEOs. They've got the vision. Thomas Edison was probably autistic. He was labeled a hyperactive adult high school dropout. Oh, and a bad boy, too. Burned up the baggage car of a train. Imagine all the trouble he'd be in today. But he had a paper route when he was a real young kid. He was a telegraph operator at age 14. He learned how to work. Now, what are some of the common denominators of some of these unique minds? They grew up with lots of books and learning. They had early exposure to career interests. They were not over-specialized. And the other thing is, I had to learn how to drive. And I'm seeing a lot of kids that are different not learning how to drive. It's going to take longer. I started in the middle of the horse pasture with 3 on the tree. Another kid might need to start in the middle of a gigantic parking lot, because you got to learn how to drive that car before you do traffic. This is how you deal with a multitasking issue. You got to learn how to drive first. And that's some of my favorite books when I was a kid, both Animals and Inventors. Now, this is one of my most important slides. This is the different kinds of minds. I am a photorealistic visual thinker. Everything I think about is a photo. And this is called an object visualizer. Can't do algebra. You're screening us out. And you need us. And you need us really bad to prevent messes like the Boeing MAX airplane crashes. The first mistake that was made there was purely visual. It's not a very good idea to take this little fragile finger that sticks out of the side of the plane. It's called angle of attack sensor. You find out how fragile they are. Are you going to wire that directly into the plane's active control and only have one of them when they're very fragile? No. That was the first mistake that was made. Now, other stuff went wrong. You should have wired two of them in, and they got to agree by 5% on the angle. Boeing has another airplane that does that. How did you make this mistake? See, this is a mistake that a visual thinker would never make. Once I found out what an angle of attack sensor was, and I saw how fragile it was, would I trust one little fragile thing that a bird can just rip it off a plane? You see, I see it. It's not abstract. There's mathematical ways to problem solving, and then there's visual ways to problem solving. Then you have the mathematics mind. That's your pattern thinker. They calculate risks. They don't see it. Well, you need both kinds of minds. I can't design the rest of the airplane. But I can't believe the mistake they made. Because when you think about it visually, it is so basic. Mathematicians are pattern thinkers. These are your programmers, your more traditional types of engineers. Then you have the verbal thinkers who think in words. Now, when I was young, I thought everybody thought in pictures. It was a revelation for me to find out that people think differently. But the different kinds of minds can complement each other. Let's take something like the iPhone. Steve Jobs was an artist. That's why the iPhone's easy to use. But then the engineers had to make it work. That's the different minds working together. So it turns out I got some big visual thinking circuits right there. They're really fun to look at. Now, I often get asked, how do you tell if a kid is what kind of thinker a kid is? When they're 7 or 8 years old, visual thinkers draw. Mathematicians will like math. Well, then give them harder math. Don't make them do the baby stuff. Advance them forward. I think every high school ought to have science and nature in it. Oh, man, I have seen stuff. The pattern thinkers are going to go crazy. I get Chemical and Engineering News. I love that little magazine. And I saw a molecule in there that looked like a cathedral stained glass window. Come on, pattern mathematicians, you're going to freak out over this stuff. But they got to find out about it. They got to get shown it. And there's part of my brain where that wiped out the algebra department. I've got no working memory. Now, to do designing, I don't need working memory, because once I got the cloud open, then I've got my whole video library of pictures. But we got to get these kids out doing stuff, because you got to fill the database up. So they got lots of pictures, because concepts are formed with specific examples. It's bottom up, it's not top down. Thomas Edison said, I'm not a mathematician. I can always hire a mathematician, but they can't hire me. It's that simple. You want the science for this? Well, I've got that in my autistic brain book, and we got plenty of those we're going to sell afterwards. I'm a shameless book promoter. Okay. All right, here's another aircraft thing. I really like aircraft. You know, I used to be terrified of flying. You know how I got over it? I had to make them interesting. I got to fly on the jump seat of a big plane. This was in the early 70s. Really cool. I've been in the cockpit of tons of different planes, jets, all kinds of airplanes. You got to make them interesting. And I flew in the jump seat of a plane. It's called the cow poop Connie. That isn't really what they called her. And she hauled dairy cows to Puerto Rico. It was a Miami airport, early 70s. I learned every way to torture aircraft, and they still flew. You see, you had to make them interesting. I also used to be really scared of public speaking. You got to just do it. Have really good slides. And I tell them, I always go over my students' slides, make sure they got really good slides. And then if you freeze, you just read your slides. It's not the end of the world. It's just not the end of the world at all. Now, you read your slides. Okay, I really liked this visual thinking question they used to ask engineering students. Boeing used to come in and do this at Texas A&M University. So imagine one of them big Craftsman toolboxes, real big ones, full of tools. It's on a crane, 20 feet above the wing of an airplane. All right, I might want to have you look at that. And after they drop this thing on the plane accidentally, on the wing, they test it all out, and they find it's within the critical limits, but barely, just barely. All right, what do you do here? Don't overthink this one. You throw the part away. That's what you do. And now I'm visualizing smashing it with some heavy piece of equipment so it can never get put in the plane, ever, ever. But today, only 60% of the students will say throw the part away. But that is the correct answer. That's what you're supposed to do with it. Mathematicians calculate risk. Do you want to fly in a plane after a toolbox that big dropped 20 feet on the wing? I don't. And then I just got back from Brazil and found out that the plane I was on had duct taped something or other on the wing. I'm glad I didn't see it. But the people that were on the other side took a picture of it and showed me after the flight, and I'm going, oh, well, so what? So I had some kind of lumpy thing with duct tape. I don't know what it was. But I'm worried that our visual thinkers are getting screened out. This is something that really worries me. Fukushima was another visual thinking mistake. It's not a good idea when you live next to the sea to put your super important electrically operated cooling pump in a non-waterproof basement. That is not a real good idea. But what I've learned is that the mathematics mind doesn't see the water filling the basement. You see, I see it. That's why we need to figure out where the different minds can work together. Yes, there's the original airworthiness problem thing from the FFA. Visual thinkers can see risk. They can also see solutions to problems, like figuring out the perfect job for a student. I can see them in this store or that store. Here's some good jargon. Possible impact with terrain. That's aviation speak for crashing. Talk about a euphemism. I don't want to come out and say it. Now, Steve Jobs was fascinated by calligraphy. This brings up another really important thing. You know, some people say, well, take out all the humanities. Well, I think that might be a really bad idea. And I really liked what David Baresh had to say, the connection between Steve Jobs and so-called useless humanities programs such as calligraphy should not be ignored. What's one of the reasons that That helped Steve Jobs make nice fonts for computers, got him interested in art stuff. Yeah, there's a lot of reasons for keeping these courses. And we need visual thinkers in science. I review a lot of journal articles. I'm going to let somebody else do the statistics, but I go over the whole rest of the paper, correct grammar. The other thing I go over is the methods section, because very small differences in methods can totally change the results of experiments. There's been a lot of problems in biomedical research on repeating results. For example, one set of researchers will shake up their cancer cells like this, and another one just stirs them like that. That can change the results because the real hard shaking probably breaks the cell walls. Yes, it does matter exactly how you do the methods. And I've read papers, well, they described all their lab work, but they didn't tell me what breed of cattle they used. That can be really important. They didn't tell me how the cattle were housed. No, this is really important detail. How did they exactly handle the cattle? This is all detail that's really important. I really love this Marine Innovation Boot Camp. They'll give a bunch of soldiers a pile of junk and they'll say, make a vehicle out of it. And what's been found in that, the degreed engineers don't know where to start, but the truck mechanics, they can do it. They can do it. And another thing I am really concerned today is we're losing skills for making things like food processing plants. We're losing the skills. I went through 2 huge pork processing plants that are 3 years old right now, and all of the specialized equipment is imported. And the reason for that is we don't know how to make it anymore. I went to the Steve Jobs Theater, structural glass walls, carbon fiber roof, all from Germany. We've lost the skills to make it. There's 2 parts of engineering. There's the clever engineering department, like making packaging machines, like inventing a lot of the very clever farm equipment that's used around here. Then you have the other part of the plant, the infrastructure, boilers, refrigeration. Yep, that part we still know how to make. But there's a whole other part I call the clever engineering department where we are losing the skills. I am really concerned about that. And it all goes back to kids not playing with tools when they were young. I've had business people say, what do we do? I said it starts with a play school workbench at age 3. We made decisions 25 years ago that we are paying for right now. Now, one of the principles of people that are different, here's another famous computer person, is uneven skills. Good at one thing and really bad at something else. Algebra for me, totally terrible. I was lucky I got through college. Fortunately, in '67, algebra was not required. If it had been required, I probably couldn't have graduated from high school. I'm seeing kids getting screened out, being not allowed to take a skilled trade like truck mechanic or welding or plumbing or electrician. We have huge shortages in those trades, and these jobs are not going to get replaced by computers. There's going to be a computer that's going to replace specialist doctors, but it isn't going to fix the hospital's air conditioning. That's just not going to happen. Now, this is Steve Jobs' Penrose mathematics. He had to do, not Steve Jobs, Stephen Hawking. He had to do all of his math in his head. He used Penrose geometry. Now, wouldn't that be fun patterns to show kids that are mathematically inclined? And these diagrams are free. I just got them off of Google Images. How about mathematics and nature? There's a great website called Wolfram Mathematica. And I think science and nature belong in every high school library. There's so much cool stuff. I look at some of the stuff they're doing in materials science. You've got molecules that look like, geometric patterns. They're just beautiful. You got the mathematic kids on that. Fractals are a lot of fun. But you got to show kids interesting stuff to get them interested in interesting stuff. They're snowflakes. Now, I really liked what Stephen Hawking had to say about disability. He could do one thing really well, and that was math in his head. And he said, concentrate on the things, yet disability doesn't prevent you from doing well. I think that's some really good advice. Another problem I'm seeing is people are letting the disability define them. For myself and for Stephen Hawking, career comes first. He had something else he was good at, too. It's a lot of fun, floating around in the weightless plane. Autism is a really important part of who I am, but it's secondary to being a professor, to having a career in the livestock industry. I'm getting worried that too many young people are getting so much into their disability that they're not doing other things. I think disability advocacy is good, but I tell a lot of these young ones, teenagers and people in their 20s, you'll be a better advocate if you can tell about how you kept a good job, got a good job, and you kept that good job. I think that's really important. Okay, here's some principles. Visual thinkers, artificial intelligence, people with autism and ADHD are bottom-up thinkers. Concepts are formed from specific examples. Verbal thinkers, grandiose theory of education or something, and it's way too abstract, way too generalized. See, I'll take specific examples and put them into categories. Yeah, one of the reasons I'm down on the video games is because I'm seeing too many specific examples of the kids ending up in the basement and they're not going anywhere. The other problem I see is when people ask me, well, what do I do about autistic kids? If they're 3, I can give you a standard thing about early intervention, 20 hours a week of one-to-one teaching. You got to teach the child how to take turns, get more language, slow down when you talk to these kids. But when they get older, I have to have a lot more information. Age. Can he talk? What's his problem? Bullying? Reading? Noise in the classroom? Here, I'll give you a little tip on how to deal with kids that are afraid of noise. I had a teacher this morning, ag teacher, said the autistic kid in her FFA class didn't want to use the electric drill. Let's just start with having him just turn the drill on and off, where that kid controls that drill. We won't drill the board yet. Just turn it on and off, where they can control it. And there's kids that have gotten over their noise sensitivity. Another kid I just heard about was terrified of the basketball scoreboard buzzer. So they took him down to the gym and they let him play with it. He started playing tunes on that thing. But the important thing is letting the kid control it. So, okay, drilling a hole in the board, that's too long for right now, but let's just work with turning that drill on and off. The other thing, my work with animals, it's sensory-based. Sensory-based, not word-based. All right, here are some tips for working with minds that are different. Do not overload working memory. That small processor messes up a lot of stuff. Attention shifting is going to be slow. Can't remember long sequential verbal information. The other thing you got to do with these kids is stretch them. Give them choices and stretch them. Too many parents are babying their kid. I'm seeing 16-year-olds that have never gone shopping that are honor students. That's completely ridiculous. And we got to limit the computers and the screen time. And there's an iPhone app now that can diagnose cancer. And I read how they trained this computer how to diagnose melanoma. It's done with many specific examples. 2,000 pictures of melanomas. 2,000 pictures, I got these little spots that are not melanoma. All these other kind of skin rashes. And you show them examples, and then the computer learns to classify. It's bottom-up thinking. Now, understanding animal behavior was aided with visual thinking. And when I first started, I couldn't understand why other people were not seeing the things that I was seeing, and that the animals were noticing visual detail that other people didn't notice, like vehicles parked alongside the chute. Well, this is weird shadows made by an eclipse. I took this 2 years ago on the sidewalk at our library, and I watched 100 students walk over these weird shadows. I didn't know eclipses did this, but I noticed these shadows. The other students didn't. Chains hanging down in chutes. I still have to talk about this. In my book, Temple Grandin's Guide to Working with Farm Animals, I got checklists of this stuff, because I still have to talk about it because people aren't removing it. I get asked all the time, are cows afraid of getting slaughtered? I can tell you they're more afraid of a paper towel doing this. I get rid of the paper towel, they go right in. Maybe a little yellow tape. Maybe they're scared of that. Or we got to make sure we give them non-slip flooring. All right, let's see how good you are at visual thinking. I want you to raise your hand if you notice that that animal was looking at the sunbeam. You see, I want you to be good observers. Animal memories are specific because they're sensory-based. For example, if you train a horse to tolerate a blue and white umbrella going suddenly opening, that doesn't transfer to flags or tarps because umbrellas look totally different than flags and tarps. You see, it's sensory-based. You want to understand animals, you got to get away from words. Early experience to career interests, riding horses, learning carpentry, going out to my aunt's ranch. I was an Easterner originally. If I had not gone to my aunt's ranch, I wouldn't have gotten exposed to the beef industry. That's why we got to get kids out doing stuff. And for students who in college need to be taking internships, try-on jobs. Find out what you like, also find out what you don't like. And when you're weird, you got to show your work off. There's some more of my portfolio right there. And there's the brochure that I had. No, I just made myself really, really good at my work. And there's the original picture of the original dip vat that was reproduced in the movie. Loved the fact that the movie showed all my projects. And there's another picture of it. And I think the thing we've got to be asking is, what is the ultimate goal of education? We need to be looking at, where is a student 10 years after high school? Where is a student 10 years after high school? I can think of a bunch of places I don't want them to be. I was doing those dip vat projects that were shown in the movie 10 years after high school. I had graduated from college. Then I had done 1 year towards a master's in psychology. That was a disaster. And then I switched over to animal science. Sometimes you don't end up where you think you're going to end up. And there's the dip vat project that they made for the movie. And here's some of construction projects first starting. Working in construction affects how I think. I spent 25 years where I'd sell that job, then I would do the drawings, then I'd supervise its construction, then I'd start it up, and then I wrote about it. But the thing about construction is, construction has an urgency. You gotta get it done. And I'm seeing with a lot of these kids, I don't see enough urgency. Now, I had a guy that was a super good job coach for me on that first job at the Swift plant. And I criticized some welding, and I said it looked like a pigeon doo-dooed on it. And Harley Winkleman, the plant engineer, made it very clear that was not acceptable. And he explained to me how I had to apologize. He took me in his office privately and explained to me what I should do. This is another thing with these individuals. Instead of yelling and screaming at them, tell them what they should do. There's also a scene in the movie where my boss slammed down the deodorant and said, "You stink, use it." It's okay to be eccentric, but you can't be a filthy slob. No, you're going to have to change that. And then there was another really good mentor, Jim, a contractor. And he had seen my drawings, and he had recognized my ability. This, again, mentors will sometimes come out of the woodwork when they recognize your ability. Okay, getting back to who builds the big meatpacking plants, visual thinkers in the drafting department, we lay out the whole entire plant. We design the whole entire layout. Then you've got the visual thinkers who do the clever engineering department, and then you've got the engineers with the formal degrees that do the infrastructure. I have seen this pattern every single meat company. They're all the same. And what we're losing is the clever engineering department that makes that super clever packaging machine, or maybe the next super clever piece of farm equipment, especially the implements. That's all stuff I'd put in the clever engineering department, because the visual thinkers are the people that make that stuff up. Now, this is my center track restrainer system, major piece of equipment I designed. This is in all of the big plants. And I get asked, what am I the most proud of? Well, this piece of equipment I'm really proud of. But one thing I had to learn is I couldn't build self-managing equipment. The big mistake that's often made is they say, okay, we put the laptop in, every kid gets a laptop, that's going to make education wonderful. Well, it doesn't. That doesn't replace teaching. It doesn't replace management. And when I was young, the mistake I made is I thought that I could make self-managing cattle handling systems. That's complete nonsense. Good equipment's certainly something I want to have, but it doesn't replace management. And this shows how the system works, but I like to show the steel work off to educators, because stupid people didn't do this kind of steel work. You're talking complicated stuff here. People with autism built these things. And the thing that makes me sad is some of the workshops where my stuff was built, they no longer make things in them anymore, because we don't have people graduating from high school that make things with welding and then gradually make new companies. You see, we've lost that skill. And there's a picture I used in my portfolio to sell some of my early jobs. That's another picture I used right there. There's another picture. And I think this is doing really good. Half the cattle are handled in equipment I've designed. But there's some people in the autism field that don't even know I've had a career in livestock. See, what I'm trying to do is bust through the silos. We got to bust through the silos. And I was just talking to counselors today, and how decisions made in education 20 years ago are affecting stuff now in a really bad way. Because these kids are ending up in the basement instead of out there making stuff. And we need people to fix stuff. About 3 weeks ago, a man in New York was cut in half by an elevator, which had not been maintained. That's absolutely, totally terrible. Elevators, we're not making those anymore. I was down in Brazil. The brand new ones are German. The old ones were Otis. That was our stuff. Ski lifts. We used to make them. When I was a child, I rode on a Roebling ski lift. That was ours. But we're not making those either. Again, this is all the clever engineering department. Now, some big bulky stuff we make that you can't ship. But the problem is the loss of the people that invent these things. People want the new magic more than they want the management. So I get asked in livestock, what am I the most proud of? I'm proud of the center track restrainer. That's my biggest, most important piece of equipment. Those were all put in plants in the early 90s. Half my clients tore it up and wrecked it. That was really discouraging. Then I got hired by McDonald's to implement this very simple measurement system. We're going to evaluate a beef plant by assessing how well it performs. Now, the trick is, what do you measure? We measured 5 simple things. It's kind of like traffic. What things would I enforce in traffic to get most of my public safety? Drunk driving, speeding, and the stopping violations. 4 and 5 are going to be texting and seatbelts. The trick is picking out which 5 things are more important. And one measurement that really worked out well was vocalization. I got cattle mooing when you're handling them. You're doing something terrible to them. Just that simple. But the trick is figuring out what are the critical control points. And people sometimes wonder, how can such a simple system work? But it did. In 1996, I collected baseline data for the U.S. Department of Agriculture. It was really pretty atrocious. Only 30% of the plants could stun 95% of the cattle on the first shot because the equipment was broken. That's management. And then when McDonald's started measuring this stuff, then things really started to improve. Big customers can make change, but we got to make sure that they don't force a company to do something stupid, because there was a company over in Europe, and a big company forced them to put in a chicken processing system that failed to work. Yeah, you don't want to do that kind of stuff. It was very interesting working with McDonald's and with Wendy's and with Burger King, because it was my job to take the bosses out of the office on their first trips to farms and slaughter plants. And I saw reactions just like that show, Undercover Boss. I saw big reactions like that. And Bob Langert, the person I worked with, has a book called The Battle to Do Good. The Battle to Do Good by Bob Langert. And I'll never forget the day when he saw the half-dead dairy cow go into his product. It was interesting seeing the eyes get opened up, the suits getting out of the office. Okay, this is the Policy Institute. One of the big problems with policy is a lot of it's way too abstract. Policymakers need to get out of the office, find out what's actually going on. Because sometimes you can put a policy in that backfires and doesn't have exactly the intended effect that you want it to have. And when I learned how visual thinking was different from verbal thinking, it gave me a lot of insight. I'll never forget the day, this was years ago, I asked a speech therapist, think about a church steeple. How does it come into your mind? And she just went, pointy thing. I have no pointy thing. I just see specific ones. And I'm going, wow, that is totally different. And then a lot of people kind of mixtures of word thinking. And what worries me is I'm worried about these kids getting screened out, and we need them. And I didn't realize how serious this problem was until I went through those 2 pork processing plants. We got 3 of them now. And the equipment, what I call the clever engineering department, it's all imported because we do not know how to make it. It's not, this isn't outsourcing. This is, we've lost the skill. And we need to change that. We're going to have to get these good classes back into schools. Now, I think they're going to do questions on little cards, but I think I'm going to cheat, and I'm going to just take a question right off the front here. Just say, want to ask me a question really quick? Well, I'm not supposed to do that, but I don't always mind my minders very well anyway, so. But with them, we're going to do some questions, and that's all. Okay, let's go ahead and do some questions. Sorry about having to drink so much water, but I'm getting over bronchitis. That brings up another thing. They put me on Zithromax. I just finished up the last dose of Zithromax. Came from Croatia, from a mysterious factory that wouldn't let me look at their webpage without logging on. That doesn't exactly make me feel really good. I hope I'm not going to be half dead tomorrow because the stuff didn't work. Yeah, then I looked up the city where the factory was, and I found out they had Doubletree Inn, and they got this good chocolate chip cookies. Yeah, at least I found that up, okay?
The first question is a greeting from the people of Croatia.
What?
No, I'm teasing.
I don't know, Croatia may be a really good place, but the thing is, I can tell you right now, I've learned a lot about supply chain management from McDonald's. And you got all these factories. You can't inspect all these factories. One of the ways to deal with it is you put in a super good lab. I mean a really good lab, and I'm going to sample that stuff, and I'm not too stupid to only take the boxes off the top of the pallet where they put the good stuff on the top of the pallet. And I'm going to make sure it's up to spec. It's just that simple. I can test that stuff. That'd be one of the ways to deal with it. And we'll buy it from Croatia. That'd be fine. But I have to say that it didn't exactly make me feel real secure. Let's put it that way.
The first question is from a grandparent of a recently diagnosed 7-year-old grandson who's on the spectrum and wonders what advice you could offer to support his success and joy in life.
Okay, 7 years old. Okay, I'm going to assume he's verbal. You see, this is where I don't have enough information. Let's assume this kid's verbal. This is about the age where you'll start seeing what kind of thinker there are. The visual thinkers will start doing art. Little mathematicians will be good at math. They need to be brought ahead in math. Build on the strength. My ability in art was always encouraged. But we've also got to teach other skills, too, like just basic manners. You see, I think one other reason why those granddads had those good jobs is because in the 50s, in my generation, social skills were taught in a much more systematic manner. You know, for example, if I went and put my finger in the mashed potatoes and went like that, Mother didn't scream no. She'd say use the fork. She'd give the instruction instead of screaming no. You tell the kid what they should be doing. And we've got to stretch them. We cannot let these kids become recluses in their room. We give them choices of activities, but you can't just stay in your room all day. I was allowed to have some time to spin things. It's okay to have some time to calm down. Some kids are going to need that. But you can't become a recluse in your room because you're not going to go anywhere if you do that. and build up on his strengths. Too often in special ed, we pound away on the deficit. Pounding away on algebra was like trying to teach a blind person photography. That's just not going to work real well. Now, I do have a book you can buy online. It's called The Way I See It. That's really good for the younger kids. Okay.
Another question says, how did you find so much good in the struggles you've encountered throughout your
How
childhood?
do I find what?
How did you find so much good in the struggles you've encountered throughout your childhood?
Well, I had a typical 50s childhood. I had a good childhood. And I was mainstreamed into a normal, small school that had 12 kids in each class. So I was going to school with my friends. Everybody got invited to everybody's birthday party. Had some great teachers. My speech teacher when I was real young, because at age 3 I really looked bad. Really great 3rd grade teacher. There was Mr. Carlock, my science teacher. And that small, old-fashioned 50s classroom that worked for me. And I was good at making things. So other kids in elementary school liked doing stuff with me, making stuff. They really liked doing that. But where I had a terrible time was high school. That's when the bullying started. Because, okay, girls were interested in boys at that time. I wasn't interested. Had a horrible time in high school. I got kicked out of a regular girls' school and ended up going to a special boarding school. And for the first 3 years, I ran the school's horse barn. But you know what? I learned how to work. And I'm realizing how important that is.
This is switching gears a little bit. It says, what do you see as the most urgent issue in agriculture currently?
Oh, man, I can't believe the general questions I get asked. That's sort of like save the entire world. All right, let's talk about some good things. I've been in the industry for 45 years, and cattle handling has greatly improved. All right, that's a real bright spot. That's really good. Now, I get concerned in genetics, and it would apply to plants too, that if you overselect for any trait, you're going to have bad things happen. Like I remember when the pig industry in the late 80s went for rapid gain, a giant loin, and thin back fat. They ended up with an aggressive, excitable, nasty pig with awful leg conformation. And then 10 years ago, some Angus cattle started having leg conformation issues. You know, so you put everything into the economy, the meat, you got nothing left for infrastructure. Your legs, your heart, nothing left for military to fight off disease. So be careful on genetics. No, never overselect for any single trait. Now, fortunately, breeders are starting to get a lot more holistic in how they're looking at things. Now, I get attacked all the time by animal activists that think I'm evil because I've designed slaughterhouses. You're horrible. You designed slaughterhouses. That's completely terrible. And I've been doing a lot of thinking. And one of the things is the whole sustainability issues. I've been doing a lot of thinking. And the welfare, I can fix the welfare. We were out at the farm today, and we were looking at the cattle on the slatted floor. Most of them are okay, but you had a few guys there that were sticking a front leg out, and that's a sign that they're sore if they're not laying this way. Don't leave them on the slats too long. They're going to get sore. That's just an example of a simple welfare thing. I can fix most of that stuff. But I had a revelation in thinking when 3 years ago they invited a crop scientist to our animal science department. And I learned from that crop scientist in the seminar the very best land you got right here. Herds of grazing bison created that land. And I got to thinking, we got to get animals and crops together. They're already doing this in North Dakota. Cover crop grazing rotated in with other crops. And so the animals are part of the land. And we need to use them to improve the land. You can do grazing programs where you improve the land. This is something I'm getting interested in. When it comes to carbon, okay, I'm going on the airplane tomorrow. It's only a little CRJ, but it's probably, it's better to go on a bigger plane because they take more people for the same amount of CO2. But transportation and power, it's like, yuck. We got to put some of the stuff in agriculture into perspective. But I'm really getting interested in integrating animals and crops together. I've been doing a lot of interesting talks with agronomists. I got back from Brazil, and I saw this disgusting monocultures of sugarcane. An hour and a half drive of sugarcane. That's all there was. That's not good. It works in the short term, but not in the long term. Yeah, unfortunately, there's economic incentives to do monoculture. It's not the thing to do. And animals are part of the land. You don't just get rid of all the cattle. We got to learn how to use them better. And my mind works to try to figure out how to solve problems. And so I've been learning little baby agronomy. Again, this is going across disciplines. I talk to crop scientists in private behind the posters at a meeting. They'll tell you we need to rotate crops. I'm glad to see you got some sorghum here. I went here in the 80s. I never saw any milo here, ever. They're getting a few other things, but we've got some big issues we've got to look at. And I don't think it's a matter of saying we get rid of all the chemicals. No, I'm much more moderate. And I thought, I read it was a really fun paper about Roundup. It was a paper that showed that the weeds would never get immune to it. I have that paper at home. I looked it up. But the weeds won. But if we start integrating crops and animals together and rotating it, we might use a little Roundup, just once in a while. We don't get rid of it. You see, that's a much more sensible approach to things. But you see, as I'm talking about it, I'm seeing it. And I'm seeing specific examples where a guy in Nebraska was rotating cattle and some other crops, and he got rid of a lot of weeds doing that. You know, let's try to figure out solutions to problems. That's what we got to do. Also, we got to communicate. Let me give you another example. In Animals in Translation, I wrote about these awful roosters in the broiler breeder colony that rip up the hens. They'd just been bred for repro, and they were maniacs. And now I found out 2 years ago they fixed the rooster, and they no longer have to cut its toes off. But you know what? The chicken industry never told anybody about it. It's really stupid. I'm glad they fixed it. It was just done with breeding. But you're not telling anybody about it. How stupid can you get? You need it when you fix things. Let's tell people about it. Okay?
Let's have two more questions. This is a little lighter. It says, what was it like to work with Claire Danes on the HBO movie about yourself?
Well, it was a lot of fun. But I did most of the work with Emily Gerson-Sains, the producer. She's the mother of a severely autistic child. With Nick Jackson, the director, and Christopher Munger, the writer. Spent a lot of time with them. And I spent about a half a day with Claire Danes, and I gave her all these ancient old tapes I had. And she kind of just became me. But when I first saw that movie at the HBO headquarters, when they showed it to me, it was like going in a weird time machine back to the 60s and the 70s. That was really weird. Okay?
Okay, and the final question is, you seem to work very hard. What is your idea of a perfect vacation?
Oh, that NASA trip I had, that was a lot of fun. You know what? It was so cool. Going to NASA was so cool. Thank you all for coming. And we're going to go sell books right out there. Thank you for coming.
Thank you.